Please stand as you are able for the Holy Gospel, according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, "In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, 'Grant me justice against my accuser.' For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, 'Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming.' And the Lord said, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones, who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. On one of the hikes to my pilgrimage in Ireland last May, the trail took us down a country road built right through a salt marsh. The marsh grass stood as tall as me, waved in the winds blowing off the nearby bay, and it kind of looked like you could just take a shortcut through them and get to the other side. But if you did that, you would soon be up to your knees in water. A marsh is one of those ambiguous landscapes because it's not exactly land, but it's not exactly a body of water. After a mile or so, we came to a crossroads and made a turn towards the bay, and as we walked, the marsh grass kind of gave way to more solid land. But before we got to the end of that road, and before we reached the sandy beach by the bay, we passed a burial ground, a couple of acres surrounded by a stone wall filled with tombstones and crosses. Why did they put a cemetery on this prime piece of real estate? It's because we were entering another kind of ambiguous landscape. It wasn't quite the beach, even though the soil was sandy, but it wasn't the fertile soil that you'd find further inland. The ambiguity of different landscapes blending into each other, forming their own unique kind of places. That's why they thought this was a good place for a burial ground. In the Celtic way of seeing the world, this represents a thin place, as they would call it, a place where the kind of normal rules of reality or experience bend as heaven and earth meet. So laying their loved ones to rest in that burial ground symbolized that they are dead, and yet they live in the risen Christ. But really, any place might become a thin place. It's wherever you have that mysterious sense of God's presence, of heaven and earth being exceptionally close to each other. And what if thin places don't have to necessarily be places at all? Maybe a thin place can also be an experience. Instead of grass and water or sand and soil coming together to form an ambiguous but unique landscape, maybe it's an experience you have that doesn't fit into a neat category. Like something that's not good, but it's not exactly bad. It's both good and bad at the same time. But that ambiguity gives the experience its power. That is where God makes the transformation happen. And that's what we see happening in the Old Testament reading today from Genesis 32, the famous story of Jacob wrestling the angel. In this story, the river Jabbok becomes his thin place. The wrestling match is that ambiguous good yet bad experience that brings transformation because God's presence has come so close. The wrestling match happens in the first place because Jacob, after living with his father-in-law's family for many years, is heading home. Jacob's got a beef with his father-in-law, an argument, so he can't stay there. But as he heads home, he's got an even older beef with his brother Esau. Esau is the same brother whom Jacob cheated out of his birthright and blessing and inheritance. So even as Jacob feels he has no choice but to head home, he's also afraid that Esau might just kill him. So Jacob comes up with a plan. He'll split up his family and split up all his flocks and herds and livestock, put them into two different groups. This is everything he holds dear in life. But that way, if one of the groups meets Esau, they can present all of these possessions as a peace offering. But if Esau decides he wants revenge instead, well, then maybe the other group can slip away and get to safety, and half of the family can live. So Jacob sends them all across the river, gives them instructions, and he stays behind and waits to see what's going to happen. And that, when he is all alone and he's let go of everything and everyone he cherishes, that is when Jacob discovers his thin place. A man appears and begins wrestling with him. They wrestle all night long. Neither of them will give up. Who is this man? He never identifies himself. Is it a man, an angel, even God? He's mysterious, powerful, ambiguous, and anonymous. But finally, this mysterious wrestler realizes he is not going to prevail. Even as he gains the upper hand by striking Jacob on the hip socket and putting Jacob's hip out of joint. Now, at this point, the easiest thing for Jacob to have done would be just give up, walk away. But that would mean no blessing, no transformation. I will not let you go unless you bless me, Jacob insists to the wrestler. And the wrestler agrees and asks, "What is your name, Jacob?" Now, in the ancient world, a name was not simply given to you because your parents liked the way it sounds. A name really meant something. It symbolized something deeper. It told everyone you met about who you are as a person. And the name Jacob, does anybody know what Jacob means? Usurper, cheater. So the wrestler gives him a new name and a blessing. He says, "You shall no longer be called Jacob the cheater." Yeah, Sydney knows. She learned about that in confirmation class. "You shall no longer be called Jacob the cheater. Your name is now Israel," meaning the one who wrestles with God. Now that sounds a lot more noble. And that's how, in hindsight, Jacob, now known as Israel, knows that in some mysterious, ambiguous way, this wrestler was none other than God himself. And Jacob called the place Peniel, which means the face of God, because he said, "I have seen God face to face and lived." As it was for Jacob, our encounters with God are often mysterious, ambiguous. We see them only in hindsight. We understand them only after we've wrestled a blessing from God in the encounter. God doesn't let us see things too clearly because it would be too much for us to handle. But God does want us to wrestle, to not give up, to be persistent, to pray and not lose heart, especially when you're not sure what's going to happen or how you're going to find the way to move forward. And it goes to show, even when you feel all alone, like Jacob wrestling with some mysterious man, angel, divine being, God himself, but all alone by the river. Even then, the mysterious presence of God is somehow right there with you. God is grabbing hold of you, challenging you to hold on and wrestle and pray, no matter how long it takes, until you receive God's blessing. Like Jacob learned, you too may find that God's presence is not always a comfort. Now, God does comfort you, to be sure, when the time is right. But other times, God's presence is there to challenge you, to wrestle you, to grab hold of you so that you will grab hold of God until God offers you a blessing and moves you through the difficulty, through, not away from, not running away from it. You have to go through it. Only by holding on and wrestling can God bring you to new life and transformation on the other side. We see a similar thing in the parable from Luke 18 that Jesus told today, our gospel reading. The widow keeps coming back to the judge and bothering him and bothering him and bothering him until she gets justice. That was her wrestling match. That's where she found her thin place, where the good and the bad combined and heaven and earth bended so close to each other that God's blessing became felt. Jesus himself is the ultimate symbol of the thin places of the world and of our experiences. In him, the good and the bad are mysteriously woven together. And that's where the blessing comes from. Because Jesus turned the cross, the instrument of death and shame, into the means of salvation and forgiveness for the whole world. That was a thin place. The good and the bad, woven together. And because Jesus went to the cross, and because he rose again, he promises to always meet you in your own thin places until he offers God's blessing.